Hello everyone. Yeah, a warm welcome to today's webinar. Agile AI in action. Why RAG systems fail and what to do instead. This is hosted by AgileFever. I will quickly introduce our speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce our expert speaker Anupama, a seasoned AI strategist and thought leader with deep experience in implementing enterprise grade AI systems. Her work spans across generative AI, agile transformation, and data strategy, making her the perfect guide to workers through today's topic.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Sai. So my name is Anupama Gadani, and I've been working in data quality, automation, and RAG since past few years now. I was with Goldman Sachs for about 3 years at the start of my career, where I built a lot of analytical tools for data quality automation. And I then moved to Pimco, which is a fintech, where I do AI product strategy. So for the past couple of months, we've been building RAG systems, and these RAG systems are already deployed. And there's definitely a lot of learning that I've got through this journey, and I'm definitely happy to share all of that with you today. So without further ado, I think we should definitely dive right in. Right, let's see. So let's start off with a very bold statistic. So 46% of the AI projects got abandoned in 2025. This is the bold headlines that S&P reports provided us. And these are not projects which are just in POC. These are actually fully funded projects which got failed and which fell through because of few reasons, which we would be going through. So this number increased from 17% to 42% from 2024 to 2025. This shows that a lot of industries want to use AI, they want to use RAG in their products, but they somehow fall through because of a lot of different reasons. Let's understand each one of these, but before that, let me introduce you to the concept of RAG. What exactly is RAG? Everybody seems to keep talking about modular RAG, advanced RAG. As soon as you open LinkedIn, there's a lot of posts talking about it. So let me try help demystifying what this is. I know many of you are product engineers here, product managers, and I would like to try to keep it simple and help you understand what exactly it is. So RAG in simplistic terms is basically like an open book exam. Instead of you remembering whatever you studied and writing it in an exam, you're basically having an open book and you're looking through each of the texts. For any given question in your exam paper, you look through it and then actually answer correctly. So that is RAG. It's basically retrieval, which is looking into the book for the correct response. And then augmentation is where you mix up this answer with the LLM. And then generation is basically the generation of the response by the LLM in a coherent, simple, natural flowing manner. So let's understand what exactly is the architecture and how does it work. So a quick infographic here which talks about the complete architecture. Let's take this complete architecture as if it's happening in two different parallel lanes. Firstly, there's a bunch of documents, say at your workplace, and you have a question. For example, you have a question about what are the number of sick days that I can take from the vacation policy guidebook. And that's you who comes in and asks that query. So the documents and you are basically talking in text English language, but the computers do not understand English. All they understand is numbers, which we call as vectors, which is basically the floating point numbers, which would be stored as embeddings. So in simplistic terms, all the text which is in the document at work is converted into something called as embeddings and stored in a vector store. Similarly, the query, natural language query which you use, is also converted to embedding and stored in the vector store. So then what happens is the real magic in vector store is where it understands. So your question might be something like, how many work days or how many sick days do I have per year? So it knows that it needs to go to the correct document, which is the vacation policy handbook and not the 401k. So that's where we have different techniques like cosine similarity, which matches the question with the response, And then this response is then provided to the LLM. LLM, as you know, it's ChatGPT, it could be Gemini, it could be Azure, and then it provides a coherent output. So basically, that's how RAG works. It's like a 30,000 feet level view. It's not definitely the detailed specs which I talked about, but let's try to dive into each one of these components and understand before we move on. Because if we think about it, each one of these modules could be the point of failure in our RAG system. All right, so the first is the user query, which is our natural language query. Just like I mentioned, it could be how many number of sick days do I have? So this query could be literally a very simplistic one, which is then pre-processed. For example, the stop words such as how many. So these are the stop words which would be stripped off of the natural language and then passed on to the next stage, which is called as the embedding model. So embedding model it's like a small black box which converts text to numbers or vectors. And there's multiple ways of doing it. So before LLM and before neural network, we had something called as word frequency models, which means it does not take any context into account. So if you ask it, how many apples did you buy? It does not know the difference. It does not know if apple is a fruit or if apple is a phone or like a watch. But in the transformer-based, which is more advanced, because it takes into account the contextual and the semantic relationship, it knows that apple could be either a fruit apple or the company Apple, which manufactures phones. So this is the kind of embedding model which is being used these days so that it's able to identify the different contextual relationships. Awesome. So now we have text to vectors. So we have vectors which is stored in something called as a vector store database. If you think about it, it's just a fancy glorified database, but for vectors. Just like how SQL is a database where the data is stored in rows and columns, vector store is stored in, I would say, JSON. It could be different formats, but JSON is something which we normally use. So there's a bunch of different types of vector stores that's available. There's Spice, there's Pinecone, Deviate, Qdrint, and Chroma. So all of these different vector stores help in the similarity, comparison, and search and retrieval. Great. So now we have all of that stored in the vector store. What next? We then ask the question and we're able to get the response, at least the nearby, like for example, the question is how many sick days do I have? And then there's a corresponding document. So it comes up with, hey, so these might be the different matches that you have. So your sick days is 20 days, maybe for a full-time employee, and maybe 3 or 4 days for a contract employee, and things like that. So all of that data is then sent to LLM. Why is it sent to LLM? Because we do not want the robotic answers. Instead, we want something which is more easy flowing and then more conversational answers. So all of this is passed to LLM. It could be any of these. And then we get the final answer, which you all see in ChatGPT, which seems to be like a honestly favorite friend because it knows how to answer. It knows our, I wouldn't call it emotions, but it knows how to answer us. It's like, hey, thank you for asking. So this is what it is. Would you like any more help? So all of that fabrication is done within the LLM module. Great. So this is how the RAG works. And this is just the naive RAG. There's definitely a lot more to it in the modular and the advanced RAG. But now that we understand RAG, I think we're in a good spot to understand what are the key failure points on why exactly the enterprises fail at what different steps. So let's understand, before that also let's understand why exactly is RAG important and what's going to happen if RAG wasn't even invented. So if you were to ask the same question about how many sick days do I have per year to ChatGPT, it's going to probably come up with some made-up answer based on other company documents because it does not have your documents, so it's definitely likely to hallucinate. which is why we have something called as RAG, and it solves the hallucination problem because you're providing your data and then asking the question on top of it. Also, if you have an updated policy document, for example, if you have a document handbook about the vacation policy which says that it's increased, the number of sick days is increased, we would also gather that information from the RAG because it has the latest input. So that's the importance of RAG. Now let's understand what are the key failure points of RAG. All right, this is super big. I have seen this happen in a lot of different companies. I have spoken to a lot of people. When I ask them, what do you think about RAG? They just come back to me saying that everyone seems to be talking about RAG. I think I need to get my company onboarded, and I think I need to do RAG. And all of this happens without a clear use case in mind. Why do you want to do RAG? Is it just because everybody is doing RAG? Well, I don't think that's a really good answer. So you need to have a concrete use case in mind, a concrete real value problem that your users are facing, and then you go see if RAG is even the solution which you need to be looking at. So the FOMO-driven RAG does not really scale well. Second one, metadata challenges. Assuming that you have an amazing use case, that yep, this use case is definitely going to solve a lot of pain points of my users, but then there comes data problem. You might have heard this a lot of times, garbage data in is garbage data out. No matter how glorified of a model you're using, if your data is not clean, if your data is not ready for AI, none of this is going to work. Let's try to understand what are the different types of metadata challenges that the companies face. One is incomplete metadata. Some companies don't even store metadata for documents. For example, it would be just plain documents, maybe with a very random title saying that training document xyz.com, xyz.pdf. It does not really make sense. It needs to have specific tags. It needs to talk about what the document is about and how often is this refreshed. So it definitely needs to follow that sort of metadata structure in order for the AI to work on it. Second one is the mismatch naming. For example, I've definitely seen this happen in some of the hospital use cases, which I was reading earlier. So there might be a lot of documents which is talking about neuroimaging, but the users might not know. They might just call it, where's my MRI brain scan? So the RAG is just going to come back and say, what are you talking about? I don't see anything like that. So definitely make sure that the naming convention is at least close to what it is. The semantic matching works, but it needs to be at least slightly similar. So the next one is the lacking tags. As I mentioned, if you think about it, it's almost like your social media post. If you post a video, if you post a post or anything on LinkedIn, you would need some sort of tags to identify if this is about a job that you're looking for, if this is about AI education that you're imparting. There should be some sort of tag associated to each of these documents so that it's easy for the retrieval to happen. And the fourth is, of course, the unstructured documents. The nature of the document is to be unstructured, but that doesn't mean the tables or the images within the document could be unlabeled. It needs to have a proper caption. It needs to understand. It needs to basically describe what is this image or table about. Otherwise, there's no way that the AI is going to understand. Even the most advanced model would need some amount of your domain expertise, which needs to be in the document. Awesome. So the metadata challenges, I think that makes sense. So let's move on and see what more challenges the industry faces. So assuming we have both of these sorted, the first one is we have a really good use case. We have amazing value to our problem and as users who would want to use it. And let's assume metadata is great as well. The third is the prompting and retrieval issues. You might have heard a lot about prompting. What exactly is it? It's just a language which is between the user and the computer. It's a language in which I can help the model understand what I want. It's a language in which I can instruct the model what I want. So if I'm not coming up with a good instruction, then there's no way the model would understand what I need. And the model is just going to come up with very generic responses. So the two problems that is usually faced with the prompt is it's either very generic. It could be something like, you're a helpful assistant who's going to help me do this, do that. But it does not really have concrete steps, like what should the output look like? And what does the subject matter expertise say about prompt? And is this prompt even applicable to your data? Like, is it applicable to your latest documents? So there's a lot of things that need to be kept in mind with the prompt. There's also a lot of frameworks that could be used for prompting. It could be something like you have a context, you have a role, and then you have a certain response generation format, which needs to be used in order to get the prompting right. So assuming the prompts are good, we then move on to the next one, which is called the retrieval failures. So there's many chances where we might not be able to get the correct responses, even if we have the prompts right. And why does that happen? As I mentioned, metadata is to be blamed, because assume that the document is not named, the neuroimaging document is not named the same, and it's something else. So when someone asks for MRI brain scan, it's going to come up with some sort of scan, but not really brain scan. So that's where the retrieval failures kick in. And if we get wrong chunks, so basically the responses that we get is called as chunks, which is the broken up text. So if we're not able to get good quality text, then there's no point in having this complete pipeline, because everything after the retrieval stage is going to be garbage. It does not matter. So basically having the metadata in order is definitely very, very important. And then the last one is the chunking problem. So what is chunking? So when the documents, as I showed in the earlier picture, documents are stored in the embedding model. But before they're stored in the embedding model, this needs to be, each document needs to be broken down into certain pieces. Now, this could be paragraphs, it could be tables, it could be titles, or it could just be a bunch of text. So this is something which is not universal. Unfortunately, you would need to fine tune for your use case. You would need to experiment with it. Is it 2048 characters? How many characters is it per chunk? So if the chunk is too small, say the chunk just has your title, then it does not make sense. It does not really serve any purpose. And you're just going to be wasting a lot of memory in the vector space and unfortunately wasting a lot of tokens for the LLM. So those are the prompting and retrieval issues. So let's look at the risk and the compliance. There's definitely a lot of chatter about risk and compliance with the increase in the LLM being available. There's so many cases where I've heard and seen the employees literally just copy pasting all of their code base to ChatGPT or any such external LLM, which is extremely, extremely wrong, and it's disastrous for a company. It could lose a lot of, it could lose definitely a lot of money for, it could be sued potentially. So this is something which we need to keep in mind, like it gives us most importance. So we need to make sure that we're not violating any privacy laws, making sure that all the PII data is completely masked and there's no risk for the data leaks to happen. And also we need to make sure that there's audit trails that's going on a monthly basis or a weekly basis, just to make sure that we are not really doing something inadvertently wrong for the company. And the access control gap is definitely huge. I've seen a lot of this in my company as well, where we implement this to make sure that the right group has the right control, right access group control. For example, I'm from the, let's say I'm from the medicine domain and the other person is from the billing domain. The billing domain person should not be seeing the medical reports. They should just be seeing the bills of the patient. So that's how the access control works. It's called the RBAC. So that's the third one. All right, this is my favorite, the evaluation issue. So this is something which I think I could talk about this the whole session. This could be a complete hit or a complete miss. There's no one-stop shop solution that could be solving your evaluation issues. What exactly is evaluation? So assuming you got all of your things in order and you got the responses as well from the LLM and you're happy with it, how do you identify that the response which is provided by LLM is up to the par? Like, how do you know that this is the correct response? And is there any way that you could use your users as well in this process? So the four things which needs to be kept in mind is we need to make sure that we are not giving up on evaluation. It's the most necessary step after every development of a product. So we need to have something called as the golden source labels. This is what we call. So we have questions and we have the responses. So we need to have the ground truth for each of these different questions that we are asking the LLM. Because without comparing it to the actual response that is from the document, there's no way to identify if the LLM really gave the correct response or just hallucinated. All right, I see a bunch of messages on the chat. Yeah, I think we could probably go through the all the Q&A towards the end of the session just because we are close in time. Awesome. So towards the end, this is the AI adoption challenges. So I see that there's a lot of people who want to learn AI, and some people who try to pretend that they're learning AI, and some people who are actually deep in the weeds for the AI. The only problem is the company needs to identify and actually help their employees upskill whatever knowledge that they have in AI. And everybody needs to have at least the basic knowledge of prompting using LLMs and using ChatGPT. And this is just for their own good. This is just for their own personal growth. And there should definitely be the SMEs who are subject matter expertise, basically, of every domain who participates in the prompting process. If that does not happen, if there's anybody who's writing prompts, then that does not make sense. Then there's definitely infrastructure issues. We need to make sure that just like how we had ML ops, we have now AI ops. We need to make sure that the data pipeline is set and the expert concentration is similarly as the SME involvement. So that's the AI adoption challenges. Great. So now that we know about all the problems that we had, challenges, let's go through each of these solutions. Just before that, I'd like to make sure if we have enough time, for should we just do a quick 5-minute walkthrough of the solutions?
Yes, we can go, do it in the room, and we also have some questions over the chat. You can take it up.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this quickly. I know that we're almost on time.
Yes.
So, yeah, awesome, okay. So the first point is, even before you do anything about RAG or Gen AI, try to identify what problems your users are facing. That's the first step. And then you identify AI even the solution. Because so many times I've observed automation could solve these problems and you would not need AI. So just make sure that you have a concrete use case which can be and will be solved by AI, which means it's not a set of rules, but it's definitely something which is more than rules, something which is coming to the human domain. Second thing is always start walking backwards from your goal. So if you have a goal of deploying a product, say in 6 months, start walking backwards. What are the things that needs to be done before I can make this happen? If you do it that way, I think it's definitely a sure shot way of planning for success. And definitely time management and resource planning is definitely going to go hand in hand with the success planning and the milestones. Second thing is the content structure. Just as I mentioned, all the different failure points where the RAG could fail. So just make sure that the documents are fully tagged, it has metadata, and it could be normalized. That means each of these naming conventions is very similar. For example, if you have a document about MRI brain scan, just make sure you add all the different tags which is related to the brain scan, and the data is clean. Basically, that should definitely solve the problem. And the third one is the, as I mentioned, the access control. Make sure the right groups of people have the right access, and then do not pass any PII, any sort of social security number, date of birth, and people's information, MRI records, should be scrubbed or should be redacted before it's passing to the LLM. And basically, you need to tag the sensitive content, saying that is it internal, is it confidential, have different levels of tagging. And the third one is the feedback loop. So this ties back to our evaluation point earlier. Make sure you are setting a really good standard of gold label. I know I saw a bunch of questions about it. So it's basically you have a document, you want to do a RAG on it. So you have this question that the user is asking. So you also would need to have that sort of golden source truth label. So if the question is, what is my 401k contribution, then where exactly should that come from the document? It needs to have that level of granularity, which is going to help the LLM, which is going to help the teams understand what they are judging against. Because LLM is not always the best judge. It's the humans plus the LLM which is the best judge. So basically, the SMEs would definitely come in handy with that sort of process, and then make sure you're getting the patterns. If somebody's upvoting your answers, that's great. Use that as reinforcement learning technique for your model. If somebody's downvoting, adding comments, go through them on a daily basis or a weekly basis, address these issues, and see where are the different missing gaps that's happening in your rack system. The next one is the rack system maintenance. As I mentioned earlier, make sure you're doing version control. This is very similar to how we do it for the software, but this is also you're making sure that the prompts are up to date as you add more and more models. So that's called the LLM drift. If you do not update your models, that's going to be stale, and it's not basically answering the question. So make sure you keep evaluating this, and then you have to monitor the retrieval quality. Make sure that the right chunks are being picked each time you ask a question. Awesome. So that was about the key failure points of RAG, and also what are the different solutions and the best practices that needs to be followed. I hope this session was useful. I know we have a lot of different questions, and definitely glad to answer them all now. Trying to see the chat window. Okay.
Hope you can able to see
Okay,
it now.
so I see. Yeah, I'm able to see it now. So the first question by Shala is what template you would follow for evaluation. So Shala, I think the first step we need to follow is evaluation. Always make sure you have a concrete set of questions and a concrete set of answers for the questions, even if it is like a very subjective question saying that describe how this fund would work. Make sure that you have what your sort of description is going to look like, and that's the golden data set, and that's the first step. So the second step is going to be you would compare the LLM response with the golden data source, and this could be either through using LLM eval as such, or there's also multiple frameworks called as RAGAs. We definitely did use RAGAs at some point for the POC. So that's one way to do it. And in order to generate these questions, I would take the real user questions that they've asked in the production environment and use them as our training data. So that's how I would do the evaluation. I see Andrew asking about gold labels on the evaluation issues. Where are they and how do they relate to benchmarks? So I wouldn't relate this to benchmarks because gold labels is mostly talking about data, and benchmarks is mostly about your blue score and the rogue score. So we would have our we tried multiple different evaluation frameworks, starting with prompt flow, but honestly, nothing seems to come close to our custom solution, which we're using because we know our data well and we know what to prompt it for evaluation. So gold labels is essentially the questions and the answers about the golden source room. So that's how I would explain that. I see Gautam having a question about the presentation. I used the Prezi for making this presentation. Glad to send you the presentation as well post-meeting. And I've seen another question from Andrew saying, can you share some strategies for source logging? Which steps in the RAG pipeline would you log out? How do you protect PII during logging? So basically, logging is something which is super, super important. Every time you make any calls, for example, starting with the ingestion of data, you would need to start logging it. So say a file A1 just got ingested, and this ingestion needs to be recorded. And once this file is then processed to embedding, that needs to be recorded. So I would say each of these steps need to be recorded up until the chunk level. So that way we are able to understand where exactly did it fail. Did it fail in the retrieval? Did it fail in the file ingestion? Or did it just fail in the prompt because we don't really have good prompts? So we use Cosmos DB for logging it. You can also use different telemetry tools in order to log all of this information. But that's crucial in order to do the evaluation or any sort of post-production RCA. And with respect to PII, I am not very sure because I've not used a lot of tools for it, but I'm pretty sure there should be a lot of masking tools using Python in the Python libraries. So I think that should help. I also see another question from Sheila about strategies on tagging. So one strategy which I really like is take a document and try to read the whole document and what does it like really, how do you take it? For example, if it's a vacation policy document, think about it from the user perspective. What are the questions that the user might have about this document? Is it going to be sick leave, maternal leave, or any sort of leave, PTO, and things like that? The key terms, basically, that would be asked by the user. So I would definitely tag it that way. So that's about the strategies in tagging. And I'm also seeing another question from Andrew saying, when scrubbing PII, if you are not providing any PII to the LLM, how do we reference PII in the response? For example, if a patient asks, what were the results of my MRI, how do you respond if the LLM does not have any information that would actually identify the patient? That's an amazing question, Andrew. Thank you so much for asking. So I would say this would tie back to basically the identifier of that question. And once you use any sort of masking strategy, say, for example, you're masking the person's SSN, so you would definitely have some sort of decoding mechanism for it. So you would, on the back end, decode that particular SSN to a value, basically like a hash map, and then you'd be able to answer that question. And it's extremely crucial to not provide one person's document to other person's document. So I really appreciate that question. I see those are the, oh, I see there's a few more questions. Subramaniam, can we enable model training using private synthetic patient data supporting research without violating HIPAA? I'm honestly not sure about that. I might have to get back on it. I'm not from the health domain, but I could definitely get an answer for that, Subramaniam. The next question is, Gautam, I want my LLM not to assume or hallucinate or look outside my documents. So when a query is asked where the answer is not in the document, I wanted to say there's no information for this query, no matter how many times the user asks the same query in different styles. I love that question. We actually had this problem for about so many weeks and months, and we finally came to a point where we call this the walled garden solution. Walled garden is basically you providing as much data as that's needed for the LLM and not anything more. So it's almost like an open textbook, and you're just providing science textbook for a science exam. You're not providing any English book or any history book. So Gautam, I think you would just need to pass the document that's needed to answer that question and not any other question. And even in the context, just make sure you have a lot of advanced prompting saying that you would just need to answer with the given source below and do not hallucinate. That's the kind of strategies we would use. And we would also add some more conditions saying that if there's any information that you're using outside the context, just say, I don't know, because the users don't want to see any rubbish answers or hallucinations. Great, I think those were all the questions. This is amazing. I love all these questions, and for some of these questions, I can get back and help with that. But thank you all so much for attending. Thanks for AgileFever team. Thanks, Sharat and Sai, for hosting this. This is amazing.
Thanks, Anupama. Thanks for your time and helping us with this webinar. If there are any questions, we will divert it to you through your email and text. So please feel free to send us any questions if you have for Anupama, guys. Okay, thanks again.